impressed by what you hear in terms of Labour's plans. I mean, is growth desirable?
So Simon Kuznets, who was the guy who developed the concept of GDP, he said GDP should not be confused with the welfare of the nation. It should not be used as a measure of that welfare. So, for instance, we recently had some major floods which forced people to have to refurbish their homes. All that is measured as part of GDP. That's considered to be something good and something that we're trying to encourage. GDP captures everything that happens, good or bad. We need a different measure. We need a measure of actual human well-being, which is independent from GDP, because this pursuit of growth, and I see both parties are totally united on this, this is what's driving Earth systems towards the brink. This is what's trashing our climate, trashing our soils, trashing our ecosystems, trashing our life support systems. We've got to unhook ourselves from the blind pursuit of growth at all costs.
Absolutely not true. And I think that, when we're talking about growth, what we really do mean is that people, individuals that work incredibly hard, get to keep more of their own money. And I actually think what's interesting, and I would be interested in how you would like to measure
What's interesting as well is I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of people who actually work hard keeping more of their own money, right? That would involve decreasing levels of income tax on people who actually work. But unfortunately, I know full well that Miss Ibrahim, as somebody who works in a free market quote-unquote think tank, she's a Rothbardian herself, believes in as minimal taxation for everybody as possible. So even people who actually don't work, who just own assets, who make money off of the fact that they are already very, very wealthy, are people she also wants to give tax breaks to, right? Do we want to have increased capital gains tax or increases in wealth taxes to redistribute wealth downwards? Well, she doesn't believe in redistribution. So, no, she doesn't actually care about people working for their money. She cares about the rich people making sure they keep as much money as possible so that we can have an unequal society and they can maintain their power. There's a reason why she gets paid by those people, because those are the ones who want to use her influence to make sure they keep their money. They're expecting return on investment.
General well-being, because ultimately I think we all want the world to be a better place. We all want the country to be a better place to live in. But ultimately I think that is done not through more government but less. And I actually do think that by allowing businesses and allowing those individuals to trade with one another, that's how we can achieve that kind of growth. And I don't think that growth is a bad thing. I think growth is a very positive thing. It's very politically charged. Both parties...
Growth as a goal in itself is not good. That's the point that George was making. He wasn't saying we should just ignore growth completely, or that GDP isn't a measure that has any utility whatsoever, but using it as the fundamental yardstick for measuring a government's performance, for example, when we could be using the Human Development Index, as been pointed out in chat, or just growth, but making sure that growth is sustainable, so we don't break down our environment. So we have green growth. I mean, that's what the Labour Party, that's the Green Party are all promoting at the moment, the idea of investing in green power to make sure that our growth can be done without damaging our overall environment, and also ensuring that we use fair taxation systems, that we use smart way of distributing the wealth within society, goes to the right people rather than all just being funneled upwards to the rich like it has been for the last 14 years. That's a good way of being able to do that whilst ensuring that we have multiple different indicators that we use for judging the health of the nation. Whereas Reem Ibrahim just seems to care about, well, as long as red line go up, world's more gooder, well, And even then, the idea that more government means less freedom for the market is completely untrue. If you look at the countries that measure the highest on the Economic Freedom Index, Nordic countries score very highly on the Economic Freedom Index, but they have huge levels of state ownership, of social ownership. 40% of grocery retail in Norway is cooperatively owned. It's a consumer cooperative. They have loads of funding for cooperatively owned energy production. They have the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, all socially owned, to pay people's pensions, to fund their healthcare service. That is social ownership. That is big government, quote unquote. The Norwegian economy has more public sector involvement as a percentage of their economy than Venezuela does. Yet no one calls Norway the failure of socialism, do they? Yet all the things where the Venezuela does bad is all because it's too socialist, too much social ownership. But Norway is the economic freedom prosperity hub of the world. Just forget the fact that loads of it is either cooperatively or publicly owned. But she doesn't want to mention that though, does she?
Seem to think that they have an idea of how to get there. But ultimately, if we're actively implementing policies that are not going to be supporting the way in which the economy is growing, we've got to stop talking about growth in that way.
Well, of course you want to rip down regulations. Of course you don't care about the natural world, because you're from the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is funded by oligarchs and corporations. Yes, and I should be. And actually the BBC should be as well, because the BBC says that the funding and affiliations of the organisations which come onto its programmes should be revealed. But the IEA pointedly and continually refuses refuses to reveal who funds it. When we find out who funds you, we discover it's oil companies, it's tobacco companies, it's the most ruthless and rapacious companies on earth.
He's not wrong. He is absolutely 100% correct. Again, right? This is capitalist ideology. This is the kind of thing that Rima Ibrahim herself believes in. People making beneficial transactions within their own self-interest. And she just thinks, well, I'm just doing what I believe in, and if IEA wants to fund me, that's good. Well, do you think under a capitalist investment mindset, a tobacco company, an oil company, an arms manufacturer, for example, is giving money to the Institute of Economic Affairs as an educational charity because they just value the idea of spreading ideas themselves, of making there a more wide discourse? No. They are spending money to make money. They are spending money because they expect return on investment. That's what these things exist for them to do. You go on to the panel show and then you say, I believe we should have lower taxes for these polluting corporations. We should have fewer regulations to manage the negative externalities of market forces on things like our environment in the search of growth regardless of the consequences. They make more money and you get to have all of your little appearances on all of these talk shows, all of these panel shows. That's your ideology. That's literally what you believe, Rima Ibrahim. That's just a mutually beneficial transaction for the IEA and the polluting industry.
And you're their spokesperson.
This is some kind of wild conspiracy that he is incredibly obsessed with.
It's not a conspiracy, it's material interest. It's basic analysis of material interest. Basic material analysis here. These people want to make more money. They pay people to say things that influence policy that makes them more money. It's not a conspiracy, it's just how material interest works. And again, she's going to make this point. She's going to make this point very, very specifically, where I just believe what I believe. I say what I believe because I honestly believe them, and you're trying to insinuate that I only say these things because I'm getting paid to do so. And we always go back to the point, that interview with Andrew Mark, where Chomsky very specifically says, I believe that you genuinely believe everything that you're saying. But if you believed anything else, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting. And that's the problem with the think tanks. That's the problem with Rima Ibrahim herself. She believes everything that she's saying, 100%. I do not think that she is just pretending to be a libertarian, right? I don't believe that she has made up the positions that she holds. I believe that she was 100% sincere. But the reason why she has the platform on the BBC, on our state broadcaster, to disseminate her garbage opinions, the reason why that she's invited on all of these talk shows, has this undue prominence, is because of her elevated position in the discourse, because of the dark money that funds the organisation that she works for. That's it. Again, the reason why she is given undue prominence is because of that funding, and that's what's being criticised here. It doesn't matter whether or not she believes it sincerely, I couldn't give a shit. But the only reason why she's sitting in that seat is because of the money that funds her organisation. The reason why, the literal reason why she's in the position to talk about these things, chat, is because she's a TikToker. She just talks about some free market economics on TikTok, didn't even have that many followers when she was picked up by the Institute of Economic Affairs, being their spokesperson, their communications leader. That's what she literally does. She does comms for them specifically. It's because she was picked up as an influencer, quote unquote. Not even a big one. I had similar numbers of followers to her on TikTok, but because she says what's good for the rich people people can fund her existence as a political commentator. They can make sure that her voice is elevated. I'm never getting on BBC Politics Live, despite being a TikToker who has a platform that at one point was similar to hers, because I don't say things that the rich people want people to hear. So I have to slum it in the YouTube algorithm. I can't wait for the leftoid think tank to give me due prominence, because they don't exist, because I don't fight for what's important, what is in the interest of global capital, of the super rich. I fight against that. There's no money from the think tanks coming to me any day, and that's the material difference here.
And look, I appreciate that this is the kind of thing that you're obsessed with individually. I would like to actually talk about the policy matters at hand, because I actually would like to talk about the way in which people in this country are suffering.
And on whose behalf are you talking?
Myself. I'm talking about
really?
myself,
And you
absolutely.
just happen to be employed by the Institute of Economic
absolutely.
Affairs,
Look,
which happens to be funded by oligarchs and corporations.
Don't dispute her motives.
Absolutely.
That's what her motives are.
They're both doing it, and she's even being protected by Joe Coburn about this as well. She's even being protected, and it's exactly what I said. She says, I'm just here talking about what I believe. Don't talk about who funds me and why I'm here, be able to broadcast my silly opinions. I just say what I believe, and you're trying to invent a conspiracy that I've made this stuff up. And she completely misses the point. And she's being protected by Joe Coburn about it as well.
Let's talk about effectively what George is saying is he thinks that I'm being funded by dark lobbyists because he doesn't think that I believe the things that I'm saying, which I...
No, we do believe you believe what you're saying. But the only reason you're sitting there is because those people pay you to be there. Again, you would just be another random nobody on TikTok like me if you didn't have the dark money funding you.
think it's incredibly offensive for you to sit here and tell me that I don't believe
Oh, boo-hoo.
that I'm saying. I come from countries that have been decimated by socialism. I believe in individual liberty. I believe in free markets, and I believe in people having the power to spend their own money without governments taking it from them. So I'm incredibly offended by this insinuation.
Like the other dark money think tank staff.
All right, listen, George, just two things. So hang on.
Yeah, I just can't believe that her belief in cutting taxes for corporations and rich people happen to be funded by corporations and rich people. Isn't that weird? Don't you find that strange? Don't you find that a little bit of a weird coincidence, chat?
Two things, George. We have also interrogated this at length on a programme some time ago, and both you and Reem are here to present your distinct views. It's not objective, it's presenting your distinct views. Let's go back to the issue of growth and why you don't think it's desirable, when the rest of the panel would probably argue that growth has been what has brought us, to some extent, prosperity, public services that we rely on. Why do you think that is intrinsically wrong?
Because it is economic growth which is the great driver of environmental destruction. And there's loads of work showing this. There's been a total failure to detach environmental destruction from growth. We've seen
what about the £28 billion that Labour is suggesting is invested in order to promote the sort of climate change policies that you would support?
Well, by all means, but let's do that instead of some of the other forces, like building new roads.
But that would be growth.
Well, we can spend that money into the economy, and that could stimulate growth. But if at the same time we're removing spending from, say, road building, which also stimulates growth, then we get a double whammy.
Well,
we get
Chris,
something better without necessarily raising GDP, which can be harmful.
That's the thing. That's the point that you make, right? That's the point I would make. I have no problem with growth. The Corbyn manifesto was pro-growth. I support green growth. I support sustainable growth. But that's the issue. It has to be sustainable. We can't just chase growth for growth's sake for two reasons. First of all, because then we're not talking about the negative externalities that can destroy our environment, that can destroy the world that we live in. If we don't measure those externalities, if they aren't something that are taken into account by those market dynamics, right? There is more than just Pareto efficiency. There is societal utility, and you've got to marry those two together in terms of policy and regulation. And second of all is because GDP as a measurement, as we talked about before, does not necessarily mean that the world is any better in terms of that utility. It doesn't mean that people necessarily have better living standards because, if all of the wealth just goes into the pockets of rich people, GDP increases, sure. But is our country better off in terms of the majority of people who live in it? No. We've had 14 years of at least some growth under the Conservative government, yet people's living standards have stagnated. Growth does not necessarily equal good. You have to regulate how you get that growth, and you have to ensure the growth goes to the right people and is distributed fairly. But Ibrahim doesn't believe in that. Reem Ibrahim does not believe in fair distribution of growth that we get, and that is the problem.
I mean, George, you should hook on the fact we haven't had much growth. I mean, we literally haven't had much economic growth, and arguably there has been some progress in decarbonisation. So in a way, we're in the state that you would sort of support.
Well, it's very interesting that when we have had growth over the past 10, 20 years, it has not helped the poor. It's been almost entirely captured by the
absolutely
rich. And we've seen a massive... No, I've got the figures. We see a massive disparity.
What figures are you talking about? George, I'm sorry, but...
I'm sure Reem Ibrahim knows exactly what it's been like for the poors. I know exactly what it's been like. The poors have been absolutely fine. There haven't been 300,000 deaths to austerity at all. Oh, no, there hasn't been. There hasn't been stagnant wages whatsoever. No supply-side labour market reform here whatsoever. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Monbiot. I don't know what you're talking about.
This is ridiculous. The idea that somehow growth hurts the poorest in society is just
No,
not
I didn't
true.
say it hurt the poor. I said it's been almost entirely captured by the rich. If you look, for instance, at the work of Emmanuel Sayers and Thomas Piketty, you'll see this massive data-gathering exercise where they're shown...
So there's been no redistribution.
Jason Hickel good on that one as well. Yeah, 100%, absolute smashing. Remember, she tries to strawman him. Chris Clarkson strawmanned him before, and then she tries to strawman him again by saying, well, you're saying that no, poor people have got nothing or they've been worse off. And it's like, no, the growth has been captured by the rich. It hasn't been redistributed, and that is the problem. It's about how you get the growth and who the growth goes to. Just like I said.
The problem is there is huge amounts of money slopping around in this country, but it is mostly in the hands of the very rich. We could be taxing them more. We don't have to tax the people at the bottom anymore. In fact, we could cut some of those taxes. We could fund these programs, but at the same time, we don't have to do so in ways that drive the destruction of Earth systems. And I'm all in favour of the green transition, but let's look at the wider picture of this pursuit of growth for the sake of growth.
It's not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth for being able to afford the things that we want to do in our country,
But there is
including the
enough
NHS.
money
Yeah, you could just tax the rich.
To afford it.
but I think-
We're massively richer than we were generations ago when they could do more.
As a result
This
of
is a
business
political
and growth.
choice.
And I also think that, when we're talking about growth as this is a very politically charged word, growth helps and benefits everyone in the economy, everybody in society, especially.
It hasn't helped everybody in society for 14 years, Reem Ibrahim. It hasn't at all. Where's the productivity? Where's the extra wages? Biggest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic War. Completely stagnant living standards for the people at the bottom. 300,000 dead people from austerity. Well, we got growth, so it must have benefited everybody. Nonsense. It's complete nonsense.
Those at the poorest in society. Let's be honest, when there is a recession, those at the very top of the socioeconomic scale aren't really affected by that substantially. It really is the people at the bottom that are affected by recession. And so what we want to see is an economy.
But George isn't saying that we have to have a recession. He's just saying make sure that we redistribute the money so poor people benefit from the growth. Again, continued straw manning of his points here. This is infuriating.
Economy that is growing, that is prosperous, an economy in which starting a business is really easy to do. And actually, I think part of that is not just cutting taxes, but also simplifying the tax system.
All right, we're going to leave it there and talk.
So simplifying the tax system, by the way, that means a flat taxation, which means tax cuts for the rich, again, because that's all these people care about, because she's paid to care about it. Simple as that. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.